Have you ever been judged by someone in a more powerful position than you are, blaming you for not trying hard enough in your life? Or maybe you notice that the longer you work, the better your life gets, the more you tend to judge others more. Maybe you had a feeling that people around you are just complaining a lot and not trying hard enough. Unfortunately, this is a common bias, and it often happens when people with different power, status, and background meet. And there are many things that unfortunately contribute to this bias, and that leads to people not understanding each other and judging each other much more. Hi everyone, thanks for joining me today. Really happy to have you back. And today we're talking about judging, blaming, and what does it have to do with how wealthy we are. There are a lot of things that contribute to the mindset difference between wealthy and not wealthy people. And today I want to talk about two that I personally can relate the most. And it is empathic gap and choice mindset bias. Let's start with the first one, with empathic gap. What is empathic gap? We as human beings tend to underestimate the effects that our emotions are having on our behavior. We can make a lot of decisions to satisfy our emotions without actually realizing it. There is a classical example. If I'm not hungry at the moment, I tend to pick a more healthier food option because I know that this is good for my health. But if I'm hungry, I don't really care about how healthy this option is. When I'm hungry, my mind is in a hot state, meaning that it is influenced by a strong emotion. The same, for example, with if I feel scared or if I feel exhausted. A cold mental state means that I'm not influenced by any emotions at the moment. And I tend to judge clearly, I tend to pick a more rational option if I'm in the cold state. But here's the problem. We tend to think that the influence of our emotions is permanent. For example, if I'm hungry right now, it's hard for me to imagine myself full and act as I'm full already, meaning picking a more healthy food choice. On the other hand, if I'm not hungry now, I tend to assume that in the future, even if I'm hungry, I will act rationally, so I will pick a healthier food. So basically, it doesn't matter if we are in a hot or a cold state. In both scenarios, we tend to think that it will stay like that forever. We tend to think that our future selves will react as if the cold or hot state will remain. And this is the empathy gap. We're practically making a false prediction about our own behavior, depends on in what state are we right now. It all leads to us not thinking about our decisions really well. In a food example, if I'm hungry right now, I tend to make short-sighted decision of not eating a healthy food. On the other hand, if I'm full right now, I tend to underestimate myself from the future and assume that I would always pick a healthy food. Now, what does it have to do with judging others? Well, unfortunately, empathic gap also influences our attitude towards others. If we're, for example, in a hot state, sometimes we tend to think that other people are in the state too. It's really hard for us to relate to a person in a hot state. There is a saying, the one that is full cannot understand the one that is hungry. And this is exactly what empathic gap is. If you're not in love right now, it's hard for us to relate to people that are in love. We can even perceive them as foolish and stupid because right now we're in a cold state and they're in a hot state. Now let's imagine we have a really wealthy person in a position of power. This person doesn't experience hunger or thirst or any other problems. This person is in a cold state. Now, what happens when this person observes another one, not wealthy, without any financial advantage, that experiences a lot of negative emotions like hunger or thirst? What happens is the wealthy person in a cold state literally cannot relate to the problems that he observes because of the empathic gap. And I mean, we are all people. It doesn't matter if we are wealthy or not. Empathic gap influences us. We're not only making false judgments about our own behavior in the future, we misjudge others depending on what state we are currently in, hot or cold. So now, how to fight this bias? Emotions are powerful and they influence us a lot. And because of that, we often cannot think rationally and logically. But empathic gap happens when we are unable to spot this, when we are failing to acknowledge this power of emotions. So the very first step in fighting empathy gap is to accept and acknowledge that we can experience emotions and they may alter our judgments about our future and about others. And then after we acknowledge that, that we can try to predict how we will feel. For example, right now I'm not thirsty, but I know that if I, for example, go to a gym tomorrow, I will be running and I will get thirsty. So because I'm able to predict that, I will take a bottle of water in advance without waiting for me actually experience thirst. And the same works with others. Of course, it's much harder, but we can at least attempt to imagine the emotional component. Imagine how would we feel if we would be in the same situation. And that would support us making a more clear judgment. This is how you close the empathy gap. But not being able to relate emotionally to people in a different emotional state is only a part of the problem. There are many researches that show that people in power tend to judge less powerful people. How does it happen? Powerful people tend to think that others have more choice than they actually do. Because of that, more high power individuals tend to blame others for things like bad performance or simply having less money. It's a choice mindset bias. If you have power, it increases your perception of other people's choice. Let's take a textbook example. We have a powerful individual who has wealth, a good job. Of course, this person works a lot and tends to think that the wealth that this person is having right now is only and only result of his own actions and efforts. Quite often people neglect what is called unfair advantages. Each of us possesses certain unfair advantages, even when we think we're not. For some people, unfair advantage is rich parents, the fact that they grew up in a full family, in a good city, in a nice neighborhood. For someone, it's the community that they have, network and relationships. It can be your tendencies and skills, or certain experiences that you went through that other people don't possess and cannot copy. We all have these unfair advantages in one way or another. And yes, quite often we neglect them. And when we're saying that we achieved something all by ourselves, we tend to forget how many things that we didn't do, that just happened to us, contributed to our success. But even if we set it aside, even if we won't take into account how much actual effort a person put into getting to this wealthy and powerful state, he's more likely to think that others have much more choice than they actually do. You may think, okay, what's the problem with that? And the problem is actually really big. Just imagine a situation. You and your manager. Your manager is a wealthy person in a position of power. That's why your manager tends to think that you have much more choice than you actually do. It means that every time you, for example, had a poor performance, not because of your bad decisions, but because of a bad luck or circumstances, your manager would rather judge you, would rather blame you for this poor performance. And in the end, your manager would rather punish you, despite the fact that you didn't really have a choice. It was not your fault. And that, to be honest, breaks my heart, because if you found yourself in the wrong end of this example, there's actually not a lot that you can do about it, because your manager would still think that you had the choice to do a better job. You just decided to do it poorly. Because your manager may have more options in the variety of different real-life situations that you do, and will think the same about you. I think that the only way to resolve this is for powerful individuals to remind themselves that they are influenced by the power they have, and their assumptions about other people's freedom of choice may be simply false. And if you're, in this example, a person in a low powerful state, an employee, the only thing you can do is to share your perception with your manager. It may not work at first, but if you do this regularly, you may create a more realistic perception in your manager's mind regarding what actual choice you have. And again, if you're in a position of power, adjust your assumptions, challenge your assumptions, stay open-minded, ask more questions. Don't be afraid to properly construct this other side of the coin, other reality that you don't see. In the end, both empathic gap and choice mindset bias contributes to inequality, contributes to unfair treatment, contributes to misjudging each other. So I do believe that the more conscious we are with our emotions, the more careful we are with judging others, the more mutual understanding we will in the end get. The better we treat each other. I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helped you detect something in your behavior that you didn't notice before. Thank you so much for watching. Check my latest video somewhere here, and I hope to see you soon. Bye bye.